Our second text is from John's Gospel. It's actually the last part of John's Gospel. Chapter 21, verses 15 to 25. And this is how John's Gospel actually ends. And last week, or 2 weeks ago, when we preached the first part of this text, I talked a lot about people having questions. What are we supposed to do now that the end has come to your Gospel? What exactly are we to do? Well, Jesus gives Peter and subsequently us, who are descendants of Peter, a very tangible call. And we hear it today, and it seems very practical, but it is full of questions that we'll look at today. So chapter 21, verses 15 to 25. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Peter said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." A second time, Jesus said to Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt really hurt because he said it to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and to go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. After this, Jesus said to him, "Follow me." Peter then turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, and he was the one who had reclined next to Jesus at the supper and had said to Christ, "Lord, who is it that's going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus said to Peter, "If it is my will that he remains until I come, what is that to you? Follow me." So the rumor spread in the community that this disciple would not die, yet Jesus didn't say to him that he would not die, but "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is it to you?" This is the disciple who is testifying to these things and has written them. And we know that his testimony is true. But there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I have a friend who lives out on the West Coast, so we only get to talk on the phone. And he is this amazing storyteller, sometimes long-winded, but they're so good that you want to listen. There are character developments, there are plots, there is suspense, there are twists, there's drama, sometimes there's a touch of violence, but usually not, and you have to be in the mood to talk to him. And I'm always grateful for one phrase that he uses quite often, "But wait, there's more." It gives you this opportunity to take a breath, to examine what he's said thus far, and try to keep up with what's about to come. Now, I am not sure, but I think my friend may have gotten that phrase, "But wait, there's more," from Jesus. Feed my sheep, tend my lambs, feed my sheep, Jesus says to Peter at the end of this gospel. As descendants of Peter, we take on this call to feed, to tend, and to feed Christ's sheep. Now, if you're like me and you're wondering, what does it mean to be a Christian, and how do you live that life on a daily basis? This is wonderful. These are tangible, specific things to do. Feed people and tend to them. In fact, feed them twice. Now, in the conversations I always have with my friend on the West Coast, when we're on the phone, I always have to jump in when he says, "But wait, there's more," and I have to say, "Now, wait a minute, let's go back to the beginning because I'm not ready for more." Sometimes I even take notes, right? I want to remember the names and the plots and all of these that have gotten almost too complex and I need to refresh. Now, I know that not all of you are energized by this call Jesus gave you. You're probably a little confused like I was. Jesus is telling us that there is more, there is feeding and there is tending, but I'm struggling with a couple of obstacles in this text. What exactly do you mean by feeding and tending, Jesus? And why do we have to feed them twice? Are they really hungry? Maybe before we start talking about feeding and tending, I have an even bigger question, one that I want to dig into today. Who are your sheep? Well, that's easy, right? When I think about who Jesus' sheep are, I immediately gravitate towards the lost, the lonely, and the outcast. Those are the people that Jesus hung out with in all the gospel stories. The woman at the well, the centurion who was a Roman. You're not supposed to talk to Romans, to the government. The lepers, those that were unclean, the other social and religious outcasts, those are Jesus' people. Not to mention the 12 men that Jesus associated with most closely, the disciples. A ragtag group of men with menial or despised jobs like fishermen or tax collector. There's the answer to your question. Those are Jesus' lambs and their sheep, the ones who are called to feed, to tend to, and to feed. That's how we live that out. So you might start thinking like I started thinking this week, we should go visit Tarboro Community Outreach, or we should head out on a mission trip with the youth, hint, hint. You might also consider putting a few extra dollars in your car so that when you see the individual on the street, you might give them a little something. I was reminded of a friend in Nashville who always carried socks, and she would hand out socks. I know a good sock maker in town if you're interested. What are other things you could do? It's spring. The weather is changing. Maybe you could go through your closet. You could donate all your old clothes or the ones that don't fit anymore. You could get rid of your kids' toys if they're not paying attention. You could give them to Goodwill or to Salvation Army. Those are the places where Jesus' sheep reside. That's how we feed them. That's how we tend to them. Now, I have started putting a time limit on the conversations I have with my friend out on the West Coast. Because I tell him constantly, I have other things to do, you know. So I'll start the conversation with, you have 40 minutes, and then I set a timer, literally. Barely it works, and I have to force myself out of the conversation, because inevitably there's a but wait, there's more. He got this part from Jesus too. I've been telling him that lately. See, we want to stop the conversation right here and move on. We know who Jesus' sheep are, so let's close up the Bible for the day. Let's head out into the world. Let's live the tending and the feeding. But wait, there's more. That's how Jesus works. You can't hang up on Jesus. And so I started to think about my own life. And I came to realize this week that as a pastor, I am gifted in that I have access to a wide variety of people. I know doctors, I know lawyers, I know nurses, I know psychologists, I know teachers, I know farmers, I know stay-at-home moms and stay-at-home dads, I know retirees, I know a lot of retirees, and I know a plethora of business women and men. Being a pastor opens me up to a wide variety of people. And I have access to those people, and I can often bypass a lot of red tape by pulling out what we in the business call the pastor card. See, receptionists change their tone of voice when I call the doctor's office and say, "Can you tell the doctor that her pastor is on the phone?" And it gets me access to certain places. And I was thinking about the fact that we got access to a really great place right before Margot was born. We got a call from the chair of the Youth and Families Committee at the church I was serving, whose husband is the chief anesthesiologist at the hospital where Lydia would have her C-section. She called me and she immediately said, "Tom saw your names on the surgery list, and he shifted his entire schedule, and he's going to be your anesthesiologist for the C-section." "We're getting the chief, Lydia. We're getting the chief," I told her. I was so excited that on September 6, 2012, I took my time in the morning. I showered. I grabbed a little bite to eat. Lydia relaxed on the couch before we had to walk in. We walked into that hospital as if we were heading out on a 5-star vacation to the beach. We were greeted by a waiting room full of women who were not pleased to see us. They were actually in labor, and at one point they claimed that they didn't believe Lydia was even pregnant because she wasn't in pain and looked too happy. I so wanted to use my pastor card at that point and say she's not in pain because I'm a pastor, but I thought better of it. We strolled into the room, the pre-room, got settled, and we waited patiently for Tom, the chief anesthesiologist, to come in and to offer us, we wondered, access to the luxury suite. That's when a man with a clipboard came in and he said, "Hi, I'm Stephen King, and I'll be your anesthesiologist today." "It's just the check-in nurse," I told myself under the breath. There is no way we're going to have a Stephen King place a ginormous needle in my wife's back. That is something straight out of a Stephen King novel. So I finally said, "When is Tom going to join us?" And somehow I managed to also include, "Did you know I'm a pastor?" "Oh, he's stuck in another surgery." "Not the pun I wanted to hear from you, Stephen." Lydia touched my arm in the way that only she can, and seeming to suggest everything's going to be okay. Remember, this man is an anesthesiologist. It will be all right. So I had come around to Stephen King, and then I heard the one sentence no one in the history of humanity wants to hear from your doctor. "This is my first epidural." I feel like you should know that. Everybody wants to hear that their doctor has done hundreds, if not thousands, of procedures, even if we know they're lying, right? We just want the best. We want the experts. Does this man know who I am? I am a pastor. I understand that everybody has to have a first, right? The doctors have to have a first. I just want it to be someone else. I wanted to be fed, and I wanted to be tended to by the best, not just somebody. Thinking back on it, I think that's when I heard, "But wait, there's more." Now, I don't have any issue feeding the outcast, the lonely, and the forgotten. I know that that is my call as a Christian, that is our call as Christians, to be with God's people and to be with them in a very specific way, feeding and tending to them. With those that are the least of us, at least we know the need is present, right? It's very right up in our face. Someone doesn't have a meal, give them a meal. Someone doesn't have a home, help them find an apartment. If someone is in need of medical attention, take them to a hospital. But wait, there's more. And I'm not ready for what's more. But Jesus is. He asks us subtly and not so subtly in this text, what about those who have needs that aren't quite as obvious? Now, I'm able to laugh at it now because everything turned out really well, but I was not a fan of Stephen King on September 6th, 2012. If your wife has a C-section, you are not allowed in to the operating room to begin. It is an operating room, I found out, and they want to keep it clean, and they want to do all of that. You are prepped outside and waited on, and they tell you to come in. So I sat in the hallway. It'll be a minute, that great line that doctors use. 5 minutes went by, then 10 minutes. Then the door opened and out walked Stephen King, and I smiled and I thought, all right, it's about to happen. But he kept his eyes down and he did not look up. He walked down the entire hallway without saying a word to me, even when I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And then another minute passed and a doctor came out and said, "You're welcome to come in." I later found out that Stephen had a little trouble placing the epidural, and that's why he wasn't in the room anymore. And I think about the fact that Stephen needed somebody to tend to him. And I know he could have used a good meal after that, but it just wasn't going to be me. But wait, there's more. Who's going to tend to me and to feed me? Who's going to tend to Stephen and to the others? Now, I'd imagine some of you were like Angie Gregg this week, and you came into the worship space and maybe wanted to come into my office like she did and say, "Ben, there's a typo in the homily title. It just says my." Is there more? You can look if you haven't looked yet. No, it's not a typo. That is the most important part, the most important word in today's text. When Jesus tells Peter to tend, to feed, and to feed again, he is specific in who we are to feed. My sheep, my lambs, my sheep. These are Jesus' sheep and lambs. They're not mine, they're not yours. And that makes the word my the most important and also the hardest word in this text. And this is why I'm grateful for the way that John's gospel ends. It's not really ending at all. It's actually just beginning. We have come to this beautiful story's end of Jesus the Christ, who has been in the world since the beginning of time, and we have heard stories of miracles and teachings. But wait, there's more. There is a crucifixion that ends with a resurrection and then amazing breakfast on the beach. And now we're standing with Jesus as he's about to ascend into heaven, and he leaves us with feeding, tending, and feeding his sheep. And it takes us all the way back to the beginning, so we might find out who are Jesus' sheep. They are the lost, they are the lonely, they are the outcast, they are the lepers, they are the widows, they are the religiously impure, but wait, there is more. They are the Pharisees, the wealthy and the powerful, the Nicodemuses, the Caiaphases, even the Pontius Pilates. They are Republicans, they are Democrats, they are Northerners, they are Southerners, they are black, white, Asian, and Hispanic. Some of them are the most seasoned veteran surgeons you've ever met, and some are Stephen King. And they're you, and they're me. We are descendants of Peter. We have been called to live as Christ's disciples, and that means that we are to live it. We're also called to accept it from others who will feed us, who will tend to us, and will feed us again. Friends, this is an incredibly complex story. There are lots of plot twists. There is some character development. There are tons of but wait, there's more scattered throughout. There's suspense, there's drama, there's even some violence. And if you get lost at any point, just keep in mind the most important word in this story, and maybe in the entire gospel, my. And remember who used it. These are all Jesus' sheep. We are all Jesus' sheep, and we are all in need of being fed and feeding, of being tended to and tending, and being fed again and offering a meal. Sometimes feeding people we don't want to feed, and sometimes being tended to by people we don't prefer that they tend to us. And in all of those moments, I pray that you hear, but wait, there's more. And then you remember that those are Jesus' sheep too. That's the good news for today, but for every day. Amen.